Everyone, welcome to Novio's Bistro celebration of sea smoke and sherry oak with our good friends from Bar Harbor Oyster Company, Joanna Fogg, and from Highland Park. Joining us again is James Darcy, calling in from Baltimore, correct? Tell me I'm right in that, James. I hope I'm right in Baltimore.
Maryland. Just a bit south of Baltimore, but Maryland, yes. Maryland.
I didn't even know there was anything else in Baltimore besides Maryland, so I just learned something new right there. So, but I wanted to thank everybody. In your kits, if you purchase the oyster and the cocktail kit, right now you should be enjoying your highball, which hopefully you are enjoying. And then in a short bit, James is going to walk us through the Highland Park 18 year. And then we are going to do a smoked old fashioned. So you should have your kit with your block, some wood. You should have a little atomizer that has Highland Park 12 year in it that you can spray on your oysters after you shuck them to experience a little bit of the salinity from the oyster and a little bit of the smoke from the scotch. It should be a nice little contrast and a complementing of flavors. So without any further ado, I would love to introduce somebody I consider a friend, and hopefully that's okay to say, Joanna, but Joanna Fogg from Bar Harbor Oyster Company. And I had a great privilege of spending a little bit of time with her on the water last week or the week before. My weeks kind of run together now. But it was absolutely amazing. A huge amount of respect for how hard her and her team work to farm these beautiful oysters for us. So I think we're going to show a quick little footage from that maybe, and then, or no, we just showed the footage. Yeah, sorry, highball in already. So if I can, Joanna, if you can just introduce yourself real quickly, if I didn't do a very good job, tell a little bit about Bar Harbor Oyster Company, and then let's just get into shucking some oysters. And
that sounds great. Thank you. You did a great job. Great introduction. We are friends.
Good.
Yeah, I'm Joanna Fogg. I own Bar Harbor Oyster Company with my husband. We've been growing oysters since 2014 in Mount Desert Narrows, so right in between Mount Desert Island and the mainland in Frenchman Bay. We started pretty small scale, and we've gotten larger and larger over the years. We've got a 22-acre standard lease, which is a body of water that we lease from the state of Maine. We grow right now only American or Eastern oysters. Our brand is Bar Harbor Blondes, and we purchase our seed every year. So we buy seed from a licensed hatchery, and we put it in floating cages. All of those cages float on the surface in the growing season. And because our sea temps are so cold in the winter, the bay actually freezes over, we sink them all to the bottom where they rest pretty much dormant. They're kind of hibernating throughout the winter. And then in the spring, we raise them again. Oysters really only grow when sea temps are about 45 degrees or higher Fahrenheit. So we have a short growing season, which means that the oysters that we bring to market are at least 3 years old most of the time, which is about twice as long or longer than our southern counterparts. A lot of southern oysters are more like a year and a half because they're growing the full year. We think that this helps develop the flavor of the oyster. Maine oysters take longer, but just like an aged whiskey or an aged wine, there is some complexity to that aging process that gives it more depth, more flavor. Our cold water also has a lot of different marine life in it, different microalgae, which play into the terroir or the flavor of the ocean. So most of the oysters that you eat are typically the same species, Crassostrea virginica or American Eastern. There are only 5 actual species of oysters. But what gives each one of them their individuality is where they're grown, the terroir of that body of water they're in, and the grow out method. When we buy oysters, we buy them when they're really, really small. So I found one of these kicking around. We typically buy, we buy our seed in 2 different sizes. We buy some 3 to 4 millimeter seed, And then also 9 to 13 millimeter seed. I measured this just before I logged on. This is 17 millimeters. So this is like almost twice the size of the largest seed that we buy. So you can imagine when we first get this stuff, it is really like a grain of sand. It's out of its larval state, so it has a little bit of a shell, but it looks like a pebble. And then about 3 years later, if things go well, it looks like this. And we will go over opening them up. So this is a 3-year oyster. You can tell, sort of like trees, oysters have growth rings. It's not exact, but if you're looking closely, you can see this is probably what it was like when I actually got the seed. So this little level, this is how big it was after 1 summer on the farm and after 2 summers on the farm. This is how big it was last fall or last winter when it went to bed. And then all of this bit here, hoping you can all see that, this kind of feathery edge. This is all new growth from this season. And you'll notice that on your oysters at home that a lot of them have this new growth. We haven't graded our market size oysters yet this year. So throughout handling, some of this will get chipped off eventually. Be careful because it can be a little bit sharp on your hands. But if we were to chip it off at this point in the game, it would slow down the growth and we wouldn't have as many oysters to bring to market. And this is a slow time of year waiting for them to essentially ripen and fill out their shell. So that's why they look like this now. They should be, pretty clean and bright. We call them Bar Harbor Blondes because we air dry them. The flavor should be bright and briny, and they should be well manicured. That's the look that we're going for. And they should also have a nice deep cup for most of the time. We want to have a cocktail size oyster, but we want it to be full of meat. This is the way you'll be shucking your oyster. So bottom down.
Can I jump in real quick?
Please.
So we haven't got to it yet, but I'm going to tease it and then we'll talk about it a little bit later. Oysters play a great role in the ecosystem of the ocean and preventing a lot of things even outside the ocean. But one of the things they do is they filter. So we're going to throw up a poll question real quick on how many gallons a single oyster can filter in a 24-hour period. So we're going to throw that up. And as Joanna's talking about shucking, if you want to go ahead and answer it, you can guess and see,
I can guess.
Big problem because you helped me write it. So, and also as Joanna's talking about this, if I can just interject, the shucker that we're using is from Toadfish. I'm a huge fan of their products. Have one of their fly fishing reels, and it's great. But the nice thing about it is they use recycled plastic for their handles, and with every purchase of a oyster shucker, they replant oyster beds with a portion of those proceeds. So not only do you get to use a great shucker to open your oysters, but you're also helping the state of the oyster community. So just wanted to tell you why we picked it. Wasn't just because it was a pretty turquoise. There was a reason behind it. So, but I'm very capable of picking something based upon color. So I that's awesome. So, all right, Joanna, if you want to go back to
yeah, so let's open one up. I'm gonna move this down and make sure you guys have an angle that works for you. Bob, can you just let me know if that's working?
That's great. Thank you.
Okay. All right, so you're gonna want to start with your oyster cup side down, the flatter side of the shell up. I'm left-handed. Most of you statistically probably are not, so you'll want your blade in whatever hand, your dominant hand, whatever hand you use as for cutting. And you're gonna want the blade to be this side up, so there's a slight angle to your blade. It's kind of like a New Haven style blade has a slight tip. You're gonna want that tip to be kind of up, so it's scooping a little bit. I typically like to start with pretty cold oysters. The colder they are, essentially the weaker the muscle is that's holding it together. So hopefully these have been iced a bit for you. I don't wear a glove. If you are uncomfortable not wearing one and you don't have one, you can easily just use the towel that you have, hopefully nearby, and kind of protect your hand like so. There are a few different, styles of shucking and ways to shuck. This is how I do it. Give it a go. I do use a board. Any kind of cutting board or hard surface. This will give you an extra point kind of leverage, an extra point of pressure. A lot of people do shuck like this, but if you're just learning, I think it's fastest and safest to go as such. And I kind of angle the oyster a little bit so that this hinge is down. This will help in case you slip. The blade won't go into your hand so much, but it just kind of works for me. It also helps prevent spilling some of the liqueur, which is on the bottom. So get your knife ready, get your oyster positioned, and then I just pry a little bit. I'm just putting, a fair amount of pressure here, but not all in once. I'm just pushing in and prying a little bit at the same time. And once I've opened it, once I've got my blade in this far, I want to be very careful to not to push the blade too far into the meat. So I'm going to pull the blade back a little bit and just keep prying. So I'm just wiggling, slowly wiggling. I've done the work of beating the muscle. If this were like an arm wrestling contest, I did the hard work. Now this is just finesse. So I'm just sliding off this top shell and it's blind. And then I'm going to take my knife and I'm going to scrape it along the top edge of the shell on the inside. There's a mantle there that is attaching it to the top shell, and I want to free it. I kind of give it a little look-see, make sure that I'm not pulling anything apart, and then I can discard this. You can see on this one, there happens to be a little bit of that new growth here. I can tell there's a slight discoloration. You're going to want to make sure you don't have any of that into your meat. So you slide that off. I sometimes, when I'm going in here, I'm going to do a few of these, but you might, if you notice, if you break any of this shell as you're prying, you may want to use your towel to wipe it off because you don't want to push any sediment or shell pieces into the meat. I'm glad on this one, I did not pierce any of the meat. Ideally, that's how it will be maintained, is exactly how it is. So I haven't actually done any damage there. The more intact the meat is, the more appetizing it is, the better the texture is. You don't want it chewed up before you put it in your mouth. You can kind of see here, this bit that looks like a scallop is actually the adductor muscle. That was what is holding it closed, and it's also what is holding it now to the bottom of the shell. So I'm going to take my knife that is slightly scooped, and I'm going to slide in underneath that, and I'm going to slice it. Just that part of it, ideally. And I'm going to do my best not to spill the liqueur that the meat is sitting in, because that's part of the profile. Not everybody wants to drink all of it. Some people, tip out a little bit, but you leave that up to the person who's eating it. So ideally, you're not spilling anything. And I just give it a little bit of a wiggle to make sure that it's going to slide freely out. And then I've got a tray of ice here. I'm gonna eat all of mine when it's someone else's turn and set that down. I will do a few more. So again, I find that hinge. I'm going in here. Sometimes you'll see this top bit. It's like a little bit of pressure, a little bit of forward movement. If it doesn't go right away, then I wipe my blade. Just remember, it's a muscle. You've got a tool, you've got leverage, you've got a brain. Just push a little bit, pry a little bit, push a little bit, pry a little bit. Then I slice that abductor muscle. I sometimes, if I don't get it on the first try when I was first learning, I would sometimes take one, work it for a little bit. If it wasn't happening, set it aside, pick up another one, come back to it. That's no problem in doing that. Again, there's this. So I'm just a little bit of prying, a little bit of wiggling, a little bit of prying, a little bit of wiggling. I see this is chipping off a little bit. No big deal. I'm just going to push this out of the way. That actually is just going to expose that hinge a little bit more. You can see what I'm doing, and I'm going to avoid any of that shell from getting in. A little bit of pushing, a little prying.
Hey, Joanna, how many oysters can you open in? I mean, how do you judge it? A minute, an hour,
We do. My staff and I do talk about OPM, or oysters per minute. I can easily shuck a couple a minute or 120 an hour. If we're doing events, that's how many I would expect. Well, I really have two main staff and myself who shuck at big events, weddings and things that we cater. And yeah, we can do 120 an hour. There's a little bit of, it slows us down a little bit when we're, talking to guests and having to replatter or do ice and that kind of thing. But we're pretty quick at it now.
Yeah, that's impressive.
Of our oysters, and we're also, one of the things that we strive for with our product is consistency. So most of the time I'm opening the same oyster over and over and over again. So ideally the shape is the same, the cup is the same, the hinge is going to be exposed the same way. They're going to be well chilled. We're using the same blade. I mean, we sometimes do it behind our backs. I'm not going to do that now, and mess around a bit. But we do hundreds a week this time of year. I'll do a little save. So if I were not to shuck one perfectly on the first go, this is something that you might see a lot at oyster bars. And now you'll know how, if you're trying to shuck quickly, maybe you're not going to worry so much about how perfectly you scrape off this top shell. Sometimes the belly of the meat will kind of protrude, in which case your knife might go up into it. If this hadn't been shucked perfectly, and maybe I had, I don't even want to do it. If that were like chopped up a bit, I don't even want to do it. A lot of people, and you can, to help kind of save that, is get your knife underneath it and do a flip. And you'll see they do that at oyster bars. So that looks a little bit more pleasing than one. I'll do it.
Don't do it.
This is really going to pain me. So you'll see now, and you'll know. Am I still on, Bob? Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know what that was.
All right. You are shucking blindly, and just getting into them can be hard. But sometimes, and I do it too, I still do it too. Sometimes my knife might go into here, and some of the contents of the belly might come out, and it might just be like a little bit cut, or maybe the gill is stuck to the top side, and it looks more like this. Don't feel bad. I do a lot of these. So if yours looks more like this, and it's not quite as pretty or kept together, what you can do to hide that slight, imperfection is just try to give it a little bit of a flip, and you can kind of put it back together. And this side of it is not pierced, and it can be a little bit more appetizing than maybe your first go around.
So we at the Bistro, we are exclusive to your oysters, and even on the weekends when I'm not working, I usually pick up oysters at your retail spot.
Yes.
But how do you normally enjoy oysters? Are you a purist? Are you a horseradish? Are you a hot sauce? Are you a mignonette? What? I
do a lot of. I probably eat most of them with absolutely nothing, because I have a few a day when I'm out on the farm, and I'm always just kind of tasting them. The flavor profile changes throughout the seasons. The rain, after a rain event, they taste different. In the middle of the summer, when the sea temp is high and some of them are spawning, they have kind of a creamy flavor. In the fall, when they're stored, they know when cold weather is coming. They don't have brains, but they're smart. And so they store up all of their glucose reserves, which is sweet. So those R months, November, December, they're really sweet, and they've got a nice texture. So I taste them frequently. So most of the time I probably have them with nothing. I am a bit of a purist that way. But I do play around with a lot of different mignonettes. So I love a classic mignonette with some champagne, vinegar, red wine vinegar, mint shallot, and cracked pepper. Sometimes I just do lemon. I've got some lemon here for myself to enjoy. My recent favorite has been a habanero with some tequila and lime sauce, just a little bit of hot. We do eat a lot of them, so it's fun to play with different sauces. Yeah. I almost never use cocktail. I'm excited to try this. I've never done that.
I was going to say, why don't we give this a try and see what we think? I have a perfectly stuck oyster here magically. I accidentally sprayed some on my hand, so I'm going to lick my hand because that's like a bonus. So in the atomizer is Highland Park 12 year.
That was dreamy.
Yeah,
I do. I like that like the fiery earthiness that goes with like that. There's so much as like water and sky, and this is just like so elemental. This was lovely. Ooh, fun. I normally think eating an oyster is like diving into the ocean, and you can definitely do that with whiskey.
Yeah, that's a nice little flavor. That's Now that you have me thinking, though, I'm also, I know we're talking about Highland Park today, but I kind of want to do a partita, reposado or something, and try that, or even an añejo, and get more of the wood flavor from it. That would be also be delicious. So something to try tomorrow.
Do you have any questions? Are we opening that up at all? Should I?
Yeah, can we? I wanted to talk about how they grow, and I know you have sold us before what we call the Fuglies, which taste amazing. But if anyone has any questions, go ahead and drop them into the chat, and either Aisha or I will make sure Joanna sees them. And I would love to hear too on how you're doing on your shucking. Anyone? Hopefully everyone's with us. I haven't seen one drop off to go to the hospital, so that's a good sign.
I have not been able to get one done yet. I am trying.
Well, Caitlin, you're not using Bar Harbor blondes, so you're at a disadvantage right now.
I'm going to join in with Caitlin here as well. And when Joanna's describing and holding up those oysters, I just been by a Whole Foods and grab what I could get. That's the best thing I could get. And these are covered in every kind of shell imaginable. So trying to find this beautiful opening that I can see is on your pristine oysters is a little bit of a challenge, because I feel like I've got to fight off 5 other mollusks on the way.
So there should be a somewhat flatter side and a somewhat more cupped side, and you want to go in where they meet on like the maybe. Oh goodness!
What is that?
Yeah.
Remember, we were just talking about Fuglies. There it is.
It's a Davy Jones's Locker style of oyster. This one.
That looks like it.
There's a place for that. I'm not gonna slam on anybody's oysters. That was probably a bottom oyster, so different grow out method, a different process. They probably handle it a lot less, and it's it's filtering a lot of water anyway. And I bet the meat is delicious, but yes, harder to shuck. It is definitely a selling point to have one that is also nice and neat.
Yeah.
If you're really struggling, Caitlin, or if anyone is really struggling and you're afraid you're not actually going to be able to open your oyster, if you have not iced them for a bit first. If you don't have a bucket of ice like I do, you can put them in your freezer for a couple of minutes. It will die, but you will not affect the meat quality. The muscle will be ineffective at keeping it closed. You could put it in your freezer for a couple of minutes before you actually, give up and not eat the meat.
The other thing I'm noticing when I have everyone in the gallery view is there's quite a few doctors that are shucking right now and a few nurses. So I'm hoping that those people are being cautious with their hands more than. So we just want to. So that's good. Anyone? I'm leaving it open just for a couple more seconds before we jump over to the next tasting, which we can do.
Bob, I know that I would starve if I was making a meal out of oysters, because I'm not very fast at this. I got 2 down. I'm on my 3rd.
The more you do, the better you'll do. A question just popped in, and I am going to rephrase it and ask like 2 questions. How many spat do you, I don't want to say plants, but do you put into your farm a year?
So this year I will seed, I think it's like 750,000 we purchased this year of two different sizes. So some of it will go into an upweller, which is kind of a nursery. It facilitates the feeding process, and the larger seed will go right onto the farm, but about 750,000 this year.
Okay. And then how many of those will make it till next summer?
So the smaller seed that we buy has a higher mortality rate. I expect I'll lose about 20 to 25% of that this year, or through the course of this year, calendar year, and then about 15% of that, hopefully no more, over the next overwintering process in the next year. But we tried to keep our dead loss at around 20% or less per year.
Per year.
So a certain amount of that is weather, is predation, is just natural.
And then just for your own promotion, you can be found online on Instagram at Bar Harbor Oyster Co., I believe.
Yep.
And maybe Aisha can throw that back in there. And if I know a lot of our guests like to go to the island on the weekends, you can purchase right from your farm, correct? Do we want to?
So well, not actually from the farm. So it requires, we have a boat to get to the farm, but we have an honor system set up in our workshop, and our website, I'll throw that out, is barharboroysterco.com. That has all of the information about kayak tours you can take out to the farm, about how to buy direct from us, different events that we do and things like that. So barharboroysterco.com is our website, and you can find out more about us and where you can find our product.
Awesome. And then for the rest of the summer, you'll be able to buy oysters at the Bistro, and we'll have the Highland Park 12 in an atomizer, so you can experience that, or a mignonette, because that's how our team likes to serve them. So if I can introduce James, and as we're talking, if you get another question coming in or anything else, please feel free to drop it into the chat. And I saw James got a Oyster open, so that's a win for the home team. And I'm watching Caitlin now to see if she's going to get one, but I believe in you, Caitlin. I believe. So if I can introduce James again from Edrington in outside of Baltimore. Just real quickly, thank you so much for joining us, James. I had a great time with you last time talking about the famous grouse, and I'm really excited to get into this. So I think we have a little video we're going to show, and then we'll jump right into tasting the 18, which everyone should have their little neat pour of the 18. But continue shucking oyster.
Life in our Orkney Island home is defined by contrasts. The sense of calm that comes from living with gale force winds every other day. A warmth of spirit forged by the harshest of elements. A rugged beauty shaped by the relentless pounding of the sea. It's this balance of extremes that makes us who and what we are. Independently minded and passionate, to create a whiskey with exceptional depth and complexity. An unexpected contrast of rich sweetness from sherry-seasoned casks and our distinctive aromatic peat. Harmonious flavours intensely balanced by our untamed nature. A wild harmony made of opposites, and a warmth that invites the outside world in. To enjoy the moments that remind us we don't have to be from the same place to share this experience. But true beauty is often found in the most unlikely of places, and that the extraordinary contrasts of life in Orkney are what make our whiskey something to be experienced, savoured and remembered. That's what makes Highland Park a wild harmony.
And you may be muted, Bob, just so you know. So I'm so sorry.
Oh,
And you're back.
Started talking, and no one missed it. I was saying every time I watch that video and I see the landscape, I always want to I want to make sure I get to Scotland. Our trip was canceled last year, but now we're just going to add Highland Park onto our tour of distilleries, so it's even better. So if I could turn over to James, right now I think we want to be tasting the 18. Is that how we want to start off, James?
I believe that is how we're going to start off. So I'm going to hijack the screen here, and jump us over to explore a little bit of what this is all about. So we are going to be tasting the 18 plus one. Sorry, my name's James. As introduced, I'm just outside of Baltimore, between Baltimore and DC. As you can tell, not a native to Baltimore and DC, though I don't know how good you are with accents. I'm from the UK myself. Hopefully, it's easy enough to follow what it is that I'm saying. If not, put those questions in the chat, and I'll happily jump on and get to those. But the first thing we're going to be doing is jumping into the Highland Park 18. So let's pull that out and jump on in. Just cover very quickly how I like to approach a whiskey. Much like Joanna was saying, you know, my life is spent around whiskey a fair amount, in the same way that Joanna's is spent around oysters. And so for me personally, when I'm coming to taste whiskeys, most of my time is spent just using my nose, my eyes, maybe a little bit on my palate, though I have to be responsible. It's strong stuff. And so the bulk of my time is spent really just looking at the color and spending that time with the nose. And you know, ethanol is a potent thing, alcohol's a potent thing. And so showing it a little bit of respect kind of like rewards you tenfold in the way in which you can get more out from the glass. And so I'd invite you, if you have some in a glass, just to, before anything else, maybe just bring it beneath the chin, somewhere that's a little bit further away from the nose and not the nose right inside of the glass. Because even at quite a distance, I feel like I can actually start to get a lot of the aromas coming out. I'm not sure if there is, if anyone is feeling confident, throw those, those notes, those scents that you find into the chat. I'm going to wait for 10 seconds, just because the second that I start saying smells, we can all smell smells. This is how our sense of smell often works. But the wonderful thing about Highland Park truly is the sense of place and where it comes from, and the crossovers between what Joanna was saying with Merroir, and then for Highland Park, it's that combination of terroir and Merroir, as we'll see in a short second. For me, this is all about kind of these dried cherry notes with this marzipan. I come from a place in the UK not far from an area called Bakewell. If anyone's watched the Great British Baking Show, you may be familiar with the Bakewell tart. You may have made one before. It has this wonderful almond, almost like mandel mass or a marzipan that goes through it, often with glacé cherries, the fake kind, but still smell and taste delicious. Highland Park 18 really, really comes out with that for me, as well as this very clear peat that isn't overbearing like you might find in some parts of Scotland. And then this sherry sweetness, this dried, rich fruitcake that comes out. As I bring my nose in, I actually place my nose in the glass, and I like to breathe in through my mouth. Doing that just allows it to gently kind of like caress your olfactory sense, instead of, if I were to do this, there's two big risks. You may have heard it from me before. One, you can burn your nostril. It's a lot for your nose to deal with in one short space of time. And secondly, you can also snort your whiskey. And that is one of my least favorite ways to enjoy whiskey. I think it's a really slippery slope. I don't recommend it. It doesn't feel great. And you really do just miss out on a lot. So after taking those couple of noses, that's when I like to take the first sip. So well balanced. We have this, then the reason I think it works so well with oysters is it has this salinity, this oceanic character, as you'll have seen from that previous video. That smoke that comes through, this is all coming from the island itself, local to the island, and a little microclimate that we're very engaged with, trying to make sure that it's sustainable as much as it can be for the future. And then towards the end, if you breathe in through your mouth and out through your nose, these sweet kind of like chocolatey notes with dried raisins and dried fruits. And it's all about that balance of the sea, of the smoke, and of the sherry oak. And to put it into a little bit of context, much as Joanna was saying, really, it's all about where this is coming. It's all about where the oysters are coming from. And I'm sure that different locations, you'll find that these oysters kind of grow and develop differently in very subtle changes of position, maybe to like from eyes upon land, but those slight changes underground and under the water rather are going to make huge changes to how the oysters are going to taste, just possibly by being, correct me if I'm wrong, Joanna, probably just like 100 meters away in the certain places will probably start to produce very different flavors, I would guess.
Yeah, no, it does. We have there's a freshwater creek, and you can tell, different times, especially after heavy rains and whatnot, things that are closer to that freshwater feed are sweeter. They have less of the briny flavor, for sure.
Yeah, and this is incredibly true with whiskey, but it's a very unique thing for Highland Park, just because of where we're located. We're really not located in quite a comparable location to other single malts from Scotland. And so if you look here, we can see Bangor, Maine is actually kind of nicely in the middle, not too low, not too far north. It's kind of just sitting there at 44 degrees and 48 north. Orkney's a little bit further north. We're not quite as far as Oslo, obviously not as far as Anchorage. I never realized just how much further north from Moscow we are, but that should give you some idea of, I've been to Orkney. It is not as cold as I think of Moscow being at all. And that's really down to this great little, almost like microclimate environment that we have compared to other locations. So you'll see here the UK, see Europe, we're that tiny bit closer to Oslo than we are to London. And you often see with a lot of Highland Parks kind of bottles and shapes and designs, there's this very clear Viking heritage that we have. That's really just down to the fact that these are the people that have lived here for centuries, and the islands were actually controlled by the Danes and the Norwegians for a long, long time. And if we zoom in just that little bit closer, this is really what makes Highland Park, is the fact that we are the northernmost single malt Scotch in the world. Of all of the different regions, and given this is a bit larger than the 100 meters that I suggested with Joanna and with Oysters, you can imagine that we're hundreds of miles difference between these locations compared to perhaps Campbelltown down to the south. You're starting to find some of that west coast peak coming in a little bit. Further up to Islay, and then also the islands off the west coast. This is where I think people think of peat as exclusively coming from. I'll get to peat in one hot minute. The lowlands, these softer, lighter styles of whiskies typically being produced. The Highlands, the largest area, but not the most distilleries. And then, of course, Speyside, that I think most people know and think of when it comes to single malt scotches. All the way up to the top here, this is us. This is our home, the Orkney Islands. And up here, there's only 2 distilleries compared to obviously more in every other location that there is. And despite being further north than Moscow, we have this beautiful kind of like year-round cool climate. We don't go from cool to absolutely frigid. We kind of stay cool year-round. And that's because we really hit at this point where you have the Atlantic Ocean, the North Sea, and this Gulf Stream coming up. And this kind of provides this year-round moderate climate, which much in the same way that you think of an oyster being underground, I keep saying underground, under the water, and is growing and maturing or developing. When it comes to aging our whiskey, that's exactly the same kind of thing. You know, some casks for some reason are wise beyond their years at 12 years old. Some of them at 18 years old, we kind of wish they'd grow up. Some of them at the age of 30, we realize, well, they're never going to grow up, and that's fine, but maybe they won't be destined to become Highland Park. The fortune for us is this wonderful location that's kind of this cool climate year round to really provide us with the best possible situation for just maturing our whiskey at a steady pace. And so really you can see from where we are, it's all about island living and how those islands and how the Orkney Islands impact our whiskey making. And there's really 2 things, as I said, the sea, the smoke, and the sherry oak. And it really sums up kind of a larger portion of how we go about making our whiskey. So this cool climate, we have these wonderful other things that happen where we combine casks at the end for harmonization. We have our hand to floor malting. It's really this is the key to what makes us who we are. And before I get on a little bit further, I know that Bob, you had a quick question I think you were wanting to throw out.
The column stills at Highland Park have something that separates them and makes them more unique, makes them unique from a traditional stills. So we're going to post a question up. Let's see how.
And you don't have to answer this second, but I'm going to stop before I give the answer really, really bluntly, because otherwise it's boring. If I give the answer straight out, then we all know it. So whilst we're working to that, there's obviously a lot that goes in prior to this. And can I just check, is that poll question shared on my screen, or you can just see?
Aisha, can you answer that?
We can see your screen, James.
Perfect. Without the poll. You
Yes,
can't see a poll on. Perfect. Great. Let's keep going. So as you saw in the video, it's all about this ocean spray. It is relentless, constant, and you can see from this footage rolling by, there's really no trees on the island. That's because it's constantly pounded by these gale force winds pushing ocean mist into the air. That's obviously then traveling over the island and hitting our cask. And we're located, I skipped past it, we're located in a place called the High Park. Right, we're from the Orkney Islands. Despite saying Highland on the bottle, we're not. We're an island whiskey. We're an Orkney Island whiskey. We're one of 2 Orcadian whiskies. And it's this High Park gave us a great location to be looking out across the rest of the island. I think I said this last time with famous grouse. The English have a bit of a reputation for taxing people, perhaps more than we should, and people often aren't happy about it. Definitely the same with Scotland. So we located ourselves at the High Park, where we could look out and see the excise men and the tax collectors when they were coming over by boat. So we could pack down the still and hide it. And a gentleman by the name of Magnus Jonsson, who was an illicit distiller in the location, this is how he used to operate, as well as hiding it in interesting places about the island as well. But this cool location is so important for maturation. And then these gale force winds knocking down these trees are incredibly important for the smoke that goes into making our whiskey. I don't know if anybody has. Bob, do you have a good working description of what peat is to put you on the spot?
I believe I do, but I would rather hear from you. I'm bowing out of this. I
Okay.
understand that it comes from the ground.
Yep.
It's almost like the second layer of the earth.
Right.
But
Yeah,
I don't
that's
have yeah.
yeah. So it's exactly that. It's, you know, we have the surface layer of the ground, and then all of the kind of vegetal matter from the surface, whether that's trees, whether that's gorse bushes, heather, grass, you know, flowers, as they die, they're on top, and then over time they end up falling below and lower and lower under the Earth's surface. And if you wait for long enough, it becomes coal. Before it becomes coal, it's peat. It's decomposed, compressed vegetal matter that's halfway to becoming coal. That's what peat is. And so in that sense, it's important to remember that it is technically a fossil fuel. It is halfway to becoming coal. And so we have to be incredibly responsible with this. To give you an idea, you'll see somebody digging it here. And there's a lot of truths about Highland Park and the way that we do things with our peat. The peat is introduced as we dry our barley. Okay, so the grain, the barley itself. And we've been able to reduce how much peat we use by 50% without actually having to change the flavor profile of our whiskey at all. And this is a big deal because it is not a renewable source of fuel. Just by adding a little bit of extra moisture, keep retaining more moisture into the grains before we add the smoke, we've been able to capture more of this peat. And so you can see he's just like layering up all of these stacks of peat. And in the UK, this was a massive socio-economic fuel source. There used to be, you know, entire commons that if you couldn't afford coal or you couldn't afford wood, you would have to use peat. And so it became a great way of raising the temperature to stop the malting process as grain is kind of malting and getting ready to turn into a stalk of barley. We would use this as a fuel source, but it would fill the room with smoke. That's where the smoke is coming from. That's where it's coming from for all of your Islay whiskies, but they're using Islay peat. That's very different. This location is unique to us. It's called Harvester Moor. There's no trees on the island. All of this kind of like layer that you're mentioning, which is about 9,000 years old for us, is made up of heather, of moss, and of grass. I don't know if anybody that's a whiskey aficionado, that's a big fan of single malt, tasted a lot of Islay whiskies, you'll notice that Highland Park just doesn't have the same single-minded driving intensity. And I don't mean that as a slight to the Islay malts, because they're delicious and wonderful in a different way. But Highland Park's peat is almost soft and delicate and integrated with these notes of violet and heather honey coming through. And that's really because of this peat source. We only are actually peating about 20% of our barley, but this is where it is coming from. It's from this process. And we've been around since 1798. You can see this gentleman here is actually putting, lighting the peat. He's putting it into here. And this is an old kiln from either 1907 or 1924. Our young kiln is from 1924, which is nuts. It's nearing its 100th birthday, and obviously the one from 1907 is even older than that. And it's exactly the same. It's just, things just haven't changed at the distillery. This is still the way that we're making our whiskey. So this is what the smoke is. And you can see that in that nature, the sea and the smoke are almost one. That combination of terroir and then the winds lashing across, becoming terroir, as all of the heather, all of the grass, everything on the island slowly goes through this process to become peat. And this is what's eventually going in to make the whiskey itself. And I think that this is where I'm going to stop to see how we went with the questions.
Yes.
It looks to me like everyone has, not everyone, I see 18% with stainless steel. So I hate to break it to you, but you will typically find that we're using copper across Scotland. That's an important thing for column, for not column stills, but pot stills. So the column, the copper is a very, it's a very reactive material. And it actually is, historically was great because you could bend it to whatever shape you wanted, and it was great for even heat distribution. But even better than that, it helps to get rid of a lot of the chemical compounds you don't want to taste in whiskey. So it's not that they're stainless steel. Cylindrical, they have a roundness to them in a general sense, but they're not a tube. They're a pretty traditional pear shape with this larger bulb at the bottom coming up to a point, and then a line arm over the top. It is, in fact, the fact that they do have windows on the side. So well done, 48% of you out there, 13 people got that right. they do have windows. And just to put it into perspective, this is kind of what the process looks like before we get to distilling. This kind of takes us along the route through fermentation. And I just put this up here just to really kind of re-demonstrate where smoke comes in, because it's a huge part of our flavor profile. And I feel like so few people really know where smoke comes from in a whiskey. It comes in the form of when we're drying the grains. We bring grains in ourselves. You can see that floor in the top left picture. We don't have big machines that do this for us. We could just buy it from a commercial malting system, but we just have a group of guys that have these malted shields or shovels that go up and down and turn this by hand. It's every 8 hours, 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. And then eventually it gets raised to a top bed. The fire is lit underneath, or this smoldering smoky mass, and that's what comes through. And that's what comes through to this point. Yeah. Any questions at this point before we jump into the 12-year? Maybe I was going to introduce the 12-year, Bob, and then talk about the sherry cask before handing it back to you to take us through the cocktail.
Sounds great.
Okay, let's get straight into it.
Yeah, and if anyone has any questions about Highland Park, please drop them in. I have one question I'm saving for the end for Joanna that I missed earlier, but we'll come back to that one.
So sherry casks are a really big deal. I can't see faces. I don't know how many sherry drinkers there are out there. I love sherry. I don't drink enough of it to keep the sherry industry in business. It's not doing as great as it used to historically. They're very rare and very expensive, which is why most people now have moved to not using sherry casks. Most single malt Scotch producers are using bourbon casks, and then you'll see on a lot of their bottlings, you'll see finished in or refinished in or recast in, because they want to spend the most of their time in a bourbon cask and finish in a sherry cask or rum cask or similar. But casks are incredibly important. Despite smoke, they contribute about 60% of the flavor for Highland Park. And for us, we never add any coloring, which is something that you can legally do in Scotland. Everything is coming from the cask. So we actually embark on this whole journey of making our casks from scratch. And this will give you an idea of what this looks like. This all happens in Spain. So we work with a number of cooperages. This is the location that the cask is made, with coopers who still make cask traditionally. And we're actually using both American oak, not bourbon casks, but American oak and European oak that is being sent on this journey. And so you can see over here, we have this Quercasalba. The American oak is going to be making its way over from the US, whilst European oak is coming typically from northern Spain, around like Galicia and Asturias and places like that. And they both meet eventually down in Jerez, which is kind of the capital. This is sherry country. This is the home of sherry. And so we're picking trees, we're turning them into staves, we send them all the way down there. They're raised into casks, and then they're filled with sherry for about 18 months. And the benefit for us is that we're obviously still supporting the sherry industry. We're also supporting coopers in Spain. We're making sure that the casks are made using trees that can be pulled from sustainable forests, in the sense that we don't plant a tree when we bring one down. We just make sure that we open a canopy and allow the saplings that are already on the floor to grow and do nature's job. That is, it likes to grow trees by itself. At which point then they're raised into casks filled with the sherry for about 18 months before then continuing the journey from the port of Cadiz all the way back up to Orkney. And so again, continuing on that oceanic kind of journey and voyage, we don't have to worry about the wind as much anymore. We obviously have motors on the boats, but times it. And then once it reaches us, it steps back into that terroir-merroir combination of having this cool climate. Sherry casks provide these really big flavors of dried fruits, very rich, vibrant colors. You imagine a bourbon cask was already used to make bourbon darker, because bourbon, when it went into the cask, was like this. It wasn't bourbon, it was just a new make spirit. This is actually Highland Park new make spirit. So this is the color before it's been in the cask. And this is the color that we achieve after 18 years. We never add any coloring to the whiskey, and all of this is coming from those casks. A European oak is going to give the bulk, and then American oak, just because it's a little bit tighter in grain, gives a little bit at the end as well. And so you'll see from this picture here, I'll pop it just onto the side before I hand it back to you, Bob, for the cocktail. not only the cask type, like what was the previous inhabitant, but also the size and shape of the cask makes a difference too. But if you draw your attention just to the bottom right of the screen, you'll see that American cask is kind of much more tightly grained, which doesn't really provide as much color or as much flavor. The European oak on the side really drives a lot of it home. So the American keeps things nice and soft and lighter, whilst the European oak could be much more dominant and bright and powerful in its flavor. And it's really the combination of these, the sea, its influence on the land, its influence on the casks through the ocean spray that's coming through, as well as the temperatures of Orkney. It's the smoke coming from the peat that we're pulling, I think it's about 8 miles away from the distillery in Hobbister Moor, where we're the only people to use it. And then these sherry casks. These are the three things that make the wild harmony that is Highland Park, and brings all of these different individual flavors together to produce something that kind of goes way beyond the sum of its parts. And so, Bob, if you do get a chance, you have to go to the distillery. It's my favorite distillery. The island's just beautiful and rugged, and there's so much to see. For those of us that can't quite make it all the way to Orkney just yet, we're going to enjoy the 12-year Viking Honor and a cocktail now. And this really is just this is one of my favorite single malts in the world. Incredibly beautiful for mixing, and I'm only jealous that I do not have all of the ingredients that Bob has in front of him and that you have in front of you. So thank you. Any questions, don't hesitate to ask, and I'll stop doing the screen here.
Thank you, James. I appreciate you. So what we're going to do is we're going to do our smoked old fashioned now. So for those people who have taken a cocktail class with us before, an old fashioned is your base spirit. So today we're using Highland Park 12 year, a sugar, a bitter, and water. The water is introduced by the dilution or the stirring of the cocktail. The bitter we are using is Allen Whale Sea Smoke Bitters, which is smoked sea salt. And we use Maine sea salt for that. The sugar is a simple syrup. And then the smoke we are going to do. So you should have a smoking block, 2 different types of wood, and at least 1 glass. I believe every kit had 1 glass, a Novio's and Famous Grouse glass. Thanks, Herb, for those. We used them up today. So what we're going to do is you're going to just put a few pieces of wood on your block. I like to use the pecan. It's a little bit of a sweeter flavor to it. Hickory is a little more woody and earthy. So you can pick what you want, or you can mix them together. You can do whatever. So you're just going to put a little bit of wood on your block right there in the center. And you're going to torch it or light it or whatever instrument you have to get it going. Once it has a little bit, you're just going to put your glass right over the top of it. You're taking the air out of it. It's going to burn for a little bit, and then you should see all that smoke just come into your glass. And you're just going to let that smoke right there just for a little bit. Give it a minute or so. It's not going to go bad. They're not going to go bad. It's not too much smoke is not a bad thing in this situation. And then when you're ready, just take your glass right off the block. You can see all that smoke come. I wish you can kind of see the screen to see it. And you have that beautiful wood smell. And then all you do now is open up your plastic flask I gave with your cocktail, pour it right into your glass, and you're good to go. I'm trying to watch the screen and see how everybody does here on their lighting. It's kind of fun to do it this way because I can see what people are doing. Joanna, can I ask you a question while people are smoking their cocktails? A question came in that asked about spawning and if it was okay to consume an oyster during their spawning period?
Yes, it definitely is. Some people really enjoy the flavor of an oyster that's spawning. I do. They have kind of it's kind of a creamy taste, I think is the best way to describe it. It's perfectly fine and safe to eat them when they're spawning. It's, some people like caviar, some don't. So it's a slightly different flavor profile. But it's safe, unlike scallops, like scallop roe and other roes can be dangerous in shellfish, but if there are, biotoxins in the water. But if an oyster is safe to eat, it's safe to eat when it's spawning.
Okay. Is there a way to tell by the oyster if it was harvested during the spawning process?
You would just notice like a creamier color, as our oysters have kind of a white meat. If it's spawning, it's more likely to be like a slightly creamier or off-white, a warmer color. It might have like some milkiness around, the meat or in that liqueur a bit, which is spawn. It's very subtle. It would be hard to tell even for me. Like I do know, but like I would have to look at a few and look closely. It's not like, lobster eggs that are bright orange. So it's a subtle difference. And ours do spawn. We do see, sea temperatures, consistently above 70, come the middle or end of August, depending on, the weather conditions. And oysters are native to Maine. So the species that we grow are native to Maine. They used to be wild here, but it was more predominant, the wild stock in like the Damascata area, where it's further inland with freshwater areas, and those warm up more quickly than other areas.
I'm sorry. I'm doing three things at one time right now. I'm trying to scan through to see if there's any other questions in here. How is everyone doing on their smoking? I'm watching. Is everyone's give me a thumbs up or a flip me off or something? Okay, there we go. Okay. Oh, that's a nice one. That's good.
Hey, Bob, are we supposed to put an ice cube in this?
You can, or you can drink it up, however you prefer. You can do it on a cube or drink it up. However you want to do it. If you guys bring me back one that's empty, I'll make the third cocktail. All right. If there's not, I'm trying to see, Aisha, did we miss any questions or anything? Oh, okay. Here's what is the main purpose for marrying the casks? That was for James.
Yeah. So very few people actually do this. The main purpose, I think, really is about integration and balancing of flavors, just in a very different way. It's kind of a twofold thing. What we do is we will take our casks and we will bring them together and we'll leave them to rest. But we bring them down to 46% ABV. Below a certain point with whiskey, it's prone to get cloudy. Just as like some of the fats and things within the whiskey itself come out of solution, then you'll get this cloudiness within the whiskey, or you might see other things floating inside. You'll find this often with single casks and things like that, but most kind of like, age statements that you'll find, at home or on your back bar, you won't find this with. So with Highland Park, what we do is we bring it together and we bring it down to 46%, at which point all of this comes out of solution, but then we leave it. As we leave it, a lot of that goes back into the solution again. It kind of like almost redissolves back in, if you like, and then it goes through a very mild filtration, where we just bring it a couple of degrees lower than the temperature it already is, and just pass it through kind of like a fine sieve, just to get rid of any bits of cask, any bits of this, any bits of that. But it's a twofold thing. One, just so that all the casks know each other and to help to marry together their flavors. But two, also to make sure that we actually keep as much of that flavor into the bottle, so that when we do put it through a filtering process, things aren't out of solution and being caught because we've worked so hard to make the flavor. We obviously want to keep it in the bottle. That's why we do it.
James, have you ever done this? Is this going to work?
Yes, that's going to work. So the big thing about this is instead of the genius of smoking your glass is that you can't take smoke back, right? If you smoke your cocktail or you smoke your spirit, if you do too much, you're stuck with smoke. You can do nothing. can you over smoke a glass? I'm not really sure that you can. I mean, there's a finite amount of surface area. It's not getting into anything. It's just creating a surface of smoke on the glass. So that when you pour your cocktail in, you get this nice wisp of smoke rather than having to worry about how much smoke have I introduced to my liquid and how smoky is the liquid become. But this, when you take that glass up, it will smell smoky. Your cocktail will have a nose of it when you put your nose towards the glass. I want to see you one-handed shucking an oyster behind your back while you make the cocktail.
I have a video like that. I'll give it to you later, all right? That costs extra, James.
You're muted, Bob.
It's probably best if I am muted when I ask this to James. I prefer cocktails, and I will drink whiskey neat. I enjoy it, especially as my first drink, never my last. But then I usually switch to cocktails. How do you prefer whiskey? You do it neat? Do you do it on the rocks? Do you do it with water? Do you do it in cocktails? How do you enjoy your whiskey?
So I almost always start with it neat, because I like it as a reference point. But this is very personal to me, the way in which I'm approaching whiskey, because I'm really concerned about how it smells. Like, I'm really concerned about how it smells. And once I add anything to it, then I can't take it back. So I'll always start with it neat. If I'm not like thinking drinking, if you like, and I'm just looking for a casual moment, it depends on who I'm with. Like, there's lots of times, typically I'll have it neat and then I'll add water. But if I'm out with friends or I'm just hanging out and doing something, then I love having a cocktail as well. I mean, Highland Park 12 with iced, it's not really a cocktail, it's a highball, but I think it's a stretch to call it a cocktail. Just ice, soda, and then just a sprig of mint slapped on your hands and just pushed into the top. I'd be happy on a desert island with that every day. I mean, I would need, because the soda water is hydrating.
Right.
I'd recommend having water with you on a desert island too.
Can't live on whiskey alone for long.
No.
Yes, you
can. But I tell you what's interesting about that is Joanna, when she was talking about how she enjoys her oysters, she said she prefers to start them just as they're shucked and naked. And James at the same time was like, I just want to do mine neat to start and then go from there. So I think that's an interesting observation that the two people who know their product best prefer it to be neat.
And as Joanna said as well, I think that with, I know for me personally, there's lots of times that I'll make certain cocktails. And as you can imagine, I've met so many people that have shouted at me that they can't believe I had it in a cocktail, and then they've shouted at me that they can't believe I've had it with ice or that I've added water. And I'm a big believer in you should enjoy it how you want to enjoy it. I mean, the biggest crime at the end of the day, whether it's a glass of whiskey or whether it's a cocktail or whether it's an oyster, is feeling forced or judged into having to enjoy it a conventional way or a way that people around you are expecting. It's one thing for somebody to say, well, I like it like this. May I invite you to try it the way I like it? Is great and nice, but life's too short to have to worry about forcing your way through something if you don't like it that way. I mean, I'm sure that Joanna feels the same. It's the only way that you're going to enjoy oysters, but you will really enjoy it, is with that good old cocktail sauce. It's better than having an oyster and going, yeah. At least that's how I feel about whiskey. I would rather everyone have the best Highland Park and Coca-Cola, because the only true tragedy would be if they were honestly just not a fan of it and had it without, if they had to have it, but no one's forcing you to drink whiskey. Don't ever feel like forcing you to drink it.
I've never had anyone force me to drink whiskey. I can say that honestly. So that's great. Thank you both for joining us. Again, if you have pictures that you've taken, please tag Bar Harbor Oyster Company, Highland Park, and Novio's Bistro in your social media posts. That really helps us get the word out about what we're doing, and hopefully you enjoyed this. The next event we have is not in the very distant future. It is actually on Thursday, which is, I feel like, in tomorrow, but it's not. Thursday at 7:30 in the evening. It's Cocktails with Friends. So it's a virtual cocktail class. Your kit will be everything you need to make 3 different margaritas and margarita riffs. And our friend for the event will be Sophia Partida. who some of you may remember from the tequila event we did on May 3rd. So she is going to be rejoining us from California. You can pick up your kits. We're going to be using Partita Reposado. And remember, if you did the Partita event, you'll also know Sophia, we do Sophia sized cocktails. So one kit is plenty for 2 people. But hopefully there's still some spots for that. If you want to jump in, it's noviosbistro.com/cocktails with friends. And that's a lot of fun. It's a much smaller group. It's very interactive. So please sign up for that and join us. I'm going to scan one more time. Interesting. I just got a message that said cocktail sauce is best with potato chips. I've never tried that. I may, just to see if it's true, but I'm going into it a little afraid. So we'll see. So thank you all so much for joining us. I really appreciate it. These mean so much to us. We will continue doing cocktails with friends throughout the summer. And we will be picking up the larger distillery conversations in September, where I believe Herb is helping me put together a Macallan event sometime in the middle of September 13th. We'll see. We'll see how that goes. That will be in person. There will not be a virtual aspect to that one, but maybe Herb, we can do a virtual Macallan thing, maybe the week leading up or the week after or something. I'm throwing it out as we're talking to all of our friends here, but maybe we can do something, for the masses, since the other one was pretty limited space.
Yeah, that sounds great, Bob. I'd be up for that.
All right.
And I think James is pretty excited about that too. I might have to invite him.
Yeah. James, you want to
I'd
come?
rather be there for the in-person one, but if I can't, then I'll be there for the virtual one.
Maybe we can make that work too. You and I just take a road trip north.
Thanks for the invite, Herb.
Pick up Herb on your way through.
That's right. And Katie.
Katie can just go out to to 95 and just jump in the car. Perfect.
Yep.
So look for that information coming out for September 13th with the in-person Macallan event. Thursday, cocktail with friends. I would love to get a few more people to sign up and sell that out for Sophia. And thank you all. Well, last thing, other than saying thank you to Joanna and thank you to James and Herb and Caitlin for all your support, is thank you to everyone else for joining these. We've been doing these now for, I think, Herb, 9 months that we've been working on these throughout the pandemic. And if I can point to one thing that really helped the Bistro during this time, it was these events. So thank you all so much for joining in, and hopefully you learned something, and if not, you at least got an atomizer and an oyster shucker out of it. So that works too. So thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Bob.
Bye. Thank you, Herb. Appreciate you.
You've already
Thanks
done
a
this
lot.
before.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Bob.